You're listening to Real Estate with Kevin Turner on News Talk 4BC.
It's just gone 21 past 9. We've got more news at 10 o'clock this morning. Some Queensland suburbs are showing really good double-digit rental yields right now, and some of the star performers have emerged out of the regions, which probably isn't much of a surprise. We've spoken about how valuable the regions are in terms of growth, and we're seeing a lot of that happen, particularly close to the Brisbane CBD. Eddie Dilleen has amassed a property portfolio of 25. He's aged 28, and that's why I want to talk to him. He says buying properties right now is a bit of a no-brainer. Good morning, Eddie. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Kevin. Going very well, thanks.
No-brainer. Hey, I believe you got married last year too. Congratulations.
I did, mate. Thanks so much. Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah, I was just reading up a little bit of your history, and yeah, no, it's wonderful. I want to talk about where you buy and why and how, but firstly, tell me a little bit about your mindset. If we can just dig into that. I mean, for a young guy like you, 28, to have been able to do this, was that something that you learnt from your parents? I'm always interested to hear about the conversations around the dinner table, whether this was ingrained in you from a very young age.
So basically it was completely the opposite. I started off,
okay.
My mum and dad basically, they owned one property, and this was out in Western Sydney, so it was very, very humble beginnings, but they long story short, they split up. They sold the house. None of them, both of them never owned a property again after that. So after that, basically, I grew up with a single mum, extremely, pretty much poor circumstances. She was on a pension. That was her only source of income, pretty much throughout growing up. So we lived in housing commission, and, for me, obviously that was a lot of, tension, friction of, being able to put food on the table and all that kind of stuff, growing up with a single mum on a pension. So, basically, in that, growing up in that kind of atmosphere, I realised, look, we didn't own our own home. We were in housing commission. We're in a pretty rough neighbourhood and all that. This was when I was obviously 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, and I just looked to the future, and I was like, I don't want this to be the case. And I realised that over time, people that do create wealth and get in a better position financially, they usually own property. So that's where the love for property began.
And how did that learning process take place? I mean, who did you talk to? What sort of books did you read to pick up on this? Because it doesn't happen easily.
Definitely. So I read the normal kind of property investment books, like everyone's heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I first got started when I was really getting interested when I was 16, 17, because I was very competitive when I was younger. I played basketball and different sports, but I always was very competitive, and I always wanted to come first at, different sports and that. But then I realized that everyone I spoke to when I was 17, 18, and they were 40 years old, they were like, I wish I bought a property when I was 18. I wish I bought a property when I was your age. So I was like, if everyone's saying the same thing, surely they got to be right in that aspect, and it makes sense. So that's when I started reading those kind of property investment books, and I got my first job at McDonald's between the ages 16 to 18. I stayed for 2 years. Saved up about $20,000, and that was enough to get start off with my very first small property.
$20,000 to someone who has a high value in money, because you never really had any, I guess, would be a very risky thing for you to go and spend on a property. How much research did you put into that first property, and how difficult was it for you to make that decision?
It was very scary. There was it was pretty much at that age, at 18, everyone's got different behaviours and that kind of stuff. But it was either I wanted a Mustang, an old school Mustang. I was either buy a fancy car for $20,000 or buy, which is a very fancy.
Control yourself. Yeah, that's right.
or buy a deposit. And most people that were older that I spoke to randomly that were 30, 40, 50 years old, they're like, buy a house, then buy a car. And so I went down that route, and to me, it didn't seem very risky at all. I did put a lot of research into it. I probably researched for in between of the ages 16 to 18 for 2 years, looking at different suburbs, looking at what they were doing, looking at what I could afford, because my borrowing capacity was was bugger all at the time. It was like 140,000 roughly back then. And I could, a lot of people want a house, but the biggest thing, the greatest thing I think that I did was just start off small. I started off with a 2-bedroom unit that was about on the central coast of New South Wales, so about an hour and a half out of Sydney, but it's still good, good quality area where there's shops, schools, infrastructure and all that. And the property's, it's doubled, if almost tripled in value over the last 10, 11 years.
You've not sold anything out of your portfolio? You're keeping them all?
Yes, so I haven't sold anything whatsoever. Not to say I might not in the future, but at the moment, like I'm 20, I just turned 29, so like I'm still in that kind of phase where I don't believe it's best to sell. I think I'll be kicking myself when I'm 45 years old if I sold half of now. While I could obviously sell half, pay a bunch outright and own a fair few properties outright with no loans on them, etc. But I know I'll be in the long term. Looking at it long term, I think I'll end up regretting that decision if I do it. So I'm just holding it for now.
Okay, you've got a great portfolio of properties. What would you estimate your loan-to-value ratio is right now? How vulnerable are you?
I'd say it's probably roughly 60% LVR, roughly, depending on the valuations and what properties I'm buying. Like, I always try to buy properties that tick the 3 main key criteria. There's 1,000 different things to look at, a million things to look at when you're buying a property, but I always want to buy not only with a high yield, but of course an area that a property that can experience capital growth over the next 7 to 10 to 15 years. So like I've bought within, the Brisbane market, the Sydney market, the Adelaide market, the Gold Coast market. I haven't bought out in the middle of nowhere like in, mining towns, regional towns, and all that kind of stuff. So all the properties are pretty much bought. They're in, metro areas where half an hour you're in the city, 20 minutes you're in the city, etc. So they've got to have growth, but also buying under market value is extremely important. I believe in making money on the way in, not waiting and hoping it goes up.
Yeah, it's very, very insightful. To buy below market, in some cases you're talking about off-market properties. Has that been a big driver for you? Have you done a few of those sorts of deals? Properties that aren't necessarily listed for sale, but the agent may be aware that it could be available?
Absolutely. So I've bought many, many properties off market before they get technically listed on real estate and domain. It's a massive thing, and those kind of relationships I've built up over the last decade. I've kind of been, finding properties, securing properties, negotiating, like speaking to hundreds and going to, thousands of open homes and all that kind of stuff. The more properties you buy, the more kind of confidence you get out of it. So you're building relationships with agents to get these properties. Are you doing anything directly with sellers? You're identifying areas and finding properties and then maybe approaching them to see if they want to sell? I don't approach sellers directly by any means. It's generally all through the agent, like real estate agents, bank administrators. I let those do, they do the sifting and all that kind of stuff. And like, there's so many different ones that they could, in different circumstances, like out of 100 properties, you might have a couple properties that the sellers have a time constraint and they just need to get rid of it. Maybe it's, no emotion. Maybe they're consolidating or maybe they're whatever the case may be, but they've got a time constraint to sell it within the next 40 days. Therefore, they'll always compromise on the price. They'll always drop the price, etc.
Have you found any properties, say, in the last week or two, or are you negotiating on any at present?
I bought one at auction, basically, on Saturday. That was a property in the Brisbane market, basically. I bought that one. What I do a lot of the times is, of course, run like RP data reports, CMAs, and even bank valuations. So if you deal with the right broker, and that's where, like, building a property portfolio for me, it's really important to build the right team of people around you.
Absolutely.
Someone that has that kind of experience. There's a lot of people I've spoken to in the past. They've got all the great titles and all the credentials, but they own like one property. So like I would rather listen to someone and take advice of someone that actually has 10, 12 or whatever. So that makes more sense to me. But I bought one on Saturday and that was for $309,000, so relatively affordable.
Whereabouts was that? You said in Brisbane?
Yeah, so that was technically out of Brisbane, so it was around like the Marsden kind of Logan kind of area.
Logan area,
yeah. So I've diversified a little. I've bought properties as close as in the Brisbane as 7Ks, but then I've also bought ones a little bit further out. There's no right or wrong to me as long as they tick those 3 criteria, and I believe in diversifying. So I wouldn't buy all inner rings because then sometimes you sacrifice on the yield and many different things. So I bought many different areas, yeah.
If you're buying a property at auction, do you get your feet on the ground and actually attend the auction, or do you use a buyer's agent to help you?
So I'm a buyer's agent myself, basically. So I do all that kind of thing. Basically, that one I bid on Saturday. I did it over the phone.
Yep.
I've got a basically property manager and all that kind of stuff that expects all the properties over the phone. Like they're in person. Then I pretty much bid on that one over the phone. But beforehand, it's just I did the research on it. So I run all the RP data reports. Got a different bank values to value it, and that came in at like 370, almost 380,000. So the difference was 22%, basically. Yeah. So it's massive.
Yeah. So you said you bought one last Saturday, which sort of leads into or actually jumps ahead of my next question. I was going to ask you whether you've increased your rate of purchasing since COVID.
Oh, definitely, absolutely. Like since COVID, I was always going to buy a lot this year, regardless, just because of I've got the ability to do so based on the equity that I built up over the past decade. And when COVID started, the interest rates got lower and all the rest of it. So within reason, but yeah, I've definitely increased it. I've probably bought 7 or 8 properties now, if you include the last one. The one I bought on Saturday was a house and a granny flat. This is basically 2 income streams in one. Yeah.
You've got 25 tenants in the 25 properties, maybe more. Are you concerned that any of them could be suffering during COVID? Has that impacted your income at all?
Not concerned whatsoever, basically, in terms of the whole COVID thing. Well, in terms of myself receiving like rent and all that kind of stuff, like I've always, with the 3 main key strategies that I've always followed, like my portfolio is pretty much massively positive geared. So like some properties I bought at the beginning were a little bit negative, and then over time they became positive. But even if 5 tenants moved out right now, the other ones would still supplement that kind of income. So and I put procedures and everything in place. The properties that I buy, a lot of them are I've got properties that are in Sydney that are expensive and that kind of stuff. But a lot of the bulk of my portfolio very affordable. So like we're talking about rents of like $350 a week, $300 a week, $400 a week. We're not talking about properties that are rent out for $1,500 a week. So if someone, it's very easy to get those kind of properties rented. And to me, it's a little bit less volatile because you've got more affordable properties that people can easily afford to rent. Like even if someone was on JobKeeper or whatever it is, like you could afford $280 a week rent, $300 a week rent. So
would you look for properties that you can add a bit of a twist to, maybe open up another bedroom or make some kind of improvement that's going to increase your rental income? And if so, how many of those would you tackle fairly quickly? Is that part of your buying strategy?
Not necessarily. Like a lot of people do go down that route where they really want to, look for ways that they can do cosmetic renovations. And I've kind of tried that strategy before myself in the past. The first 3-4 properties that I bought, I was like, let's do a renovation. I'll get a little bit more rent. I'll do this. I'll do that. Looking back on it now, I wouldn't personally do it again. I would basically, because I'd rather just personally buy under market value or buy a really good deal that's, below where I'm making 30, 40, 50, 60,000 on the way into it, rather than try to go back and spend 10 grand to then get the equity increased or then to increase the rent right away. To me, I'd rather put that capital of, let's say we spend 10K on a renovation or 15,000 or 20,000 on a renovation, I'd rather put in another property, especially if the person, depending on the person's age, how long they've got to invest and what their appetite is. But I'd rather put more capital into more properties in the beginning and grow that portfolio to 3, 4, 5 properties rather than just getting stuck at 2. Because most people get stuck at 2 or 3 in reality.
That's right. Our research has shown that very many people get stuck at 1. Maybe they'll get to 2. They may just get to 3, but very few people will go past that. What was the hardest one for you? Did you strike a block at any point, either going into the second one or the third one? Was there a point where you said, you become cautious, which is what happens to a lot of people?
Certainly hit a lot of blocks. Basically, the first one was hard. That was very hard getting into. Like I got told no by the bank like 8 times because I was working at Macca's at the time, very low income. At property number 6, I got stuck. At property number 3, I got stuck. At property number 14, I got stuck. Like I got stuck.
Was it all about finance?
A lot of the time, basically, yeah. So it all revolves around finance. Like to me, property investor, everyone focuses on let's buy the best property kind of thing, and you obviously want to do that, but it's about learning and understanding finance. Like I've got no degrees, I never went to uni or anything like that, but no. I've worked with brokers, I've worked with people, and I've really picked their brain to learn all the bank's policies and how I can use that to my advantage and learn what most people just don't have the time to learn or don't make the time to learn.
Yeah. Eddie, there's so much we could learn from you. Thank you very much. It's been inspirational talking to you, and I appreciate you giving us so much of your valuable time. Thanks for that, mate.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks so much.
All the best. Yeah. How inspirational is that, Eddie, Dilleen? Age 28 or 29, married, you'd assume, got a young family coming on. So many of his properties are positively geared. He's got 25 of them, and he just goes on and on. It's a great inspirational story. And Aidan, our producer, found that one for me. Good on you, Aidan. Well done, son. Hey, 23 minutes to 10. This is 4BC.